everyone, Gabriella here, and today I'm going to take you through how to make a magic slider card with a lot of supplies that you probably already have. So I'm doing a top folding note card at 4¼ by 5½, and I'm going to be using a couple of extra pieces of paper that are around that size. And I'm using these Spellbinders nesting heart dies to cut the shape for my window, which is where you're going to see the colored image. So I don't have exact measurements for these because it's really going to depend on what you use for your die cut for your window. So I had to choose one that was a little bit smaller because I still need space on either side to run the track on the inside. So that big heart is going to be too big, and I'll show you why once we get further on in the video. So I'm going to use the next size down, so not the largest one, but the one right under that. So I'm die cutting that out of one of my card layers. I'm not sure what was going on. My Big Shot was just moving around like crazy. And I cut that on just my magnetic plate with the two cutting plates. I didn't, tape it down or anything. And it's pretty centered, so you can just eyeball it. So now that I have that done, I need to make sure that everything's going to line up. So I'm checking it against my card base. Looks good. And so I'm going to speed some things up here because I want to show you all the steps, but it's a pretty long process. So here we go. The next thing I'm going to do is pick out my stamps that I'm going to use. So I've got my Stamp Perfect tool there, and I'm just checking with another piece of cardstock under there. I'm lining it up because I'm going to make this a little bit different than some of the other ones that you see, and I'll explain why. I have so many layers here. So at first I was going to use this stamp set from the Greeting Farm with the mermaids, but I changed my mind and I decided to use a different stamp set from the Greeting Farm. I am using one with the fairies in it. So I like this stamp set a lot. It's super cute. So I'm grabbing one of the fairies I really like out of there, and I'm going to line up my stamp where I want it to go inside of that heart. And then I decided to use this little flower as well. So now that I've got those all lined up and I've lined it up with my heart cut out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp those. And I am using Memento ink for these. So it's a dye ink, it's permanent ink, and it's a nice jet black ink, and I think it's tuxedo black. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that. Okay, and that's right where I want that. So now I'm going to get a piece of acetate, and this is an important step. I need it to fit over that stamped image, but also it needs to fit between the other layer where the heart cutout is. And it needs to be completely lined up because you're going to stamp on top of this the exact same image. So I left my stamps on my stamping tool. I just checked to make sure, so I didn't move them at all. So if you don't have a stamping tool, you can still do this, but if you have one, it does make it a little bit easier. If you have this one, if you have Misty, if you have whatever, it kind of helps speed up the process a little bit. So I'm using StazOn for this part since I'm actually stamping on top of acetate. I want it to be an ink that will stay on there, and so since StazOn is a solvent ink, it will stay on here. The only thing is this ink is pretty sticky, so make sure that you have your acetate really held down really well. You could even put like a little piece of Post-it tape or something on the side to make sure it doesn't release, because it's going to want to let go of the magnets and like stick to your stamps. So if you see here, I'm going to reach under and kind of hold it down to make sure that it doesn't come up. And I'm pressing down really good there because I want to make sure that I get it stamped right this time. So that image came out really, really clear, so I didn't have to restamp it at all. And if you can see there, I'm just lining it up to check to make sure, and that's exactly how you want it to look. So I'm going to put that away, and then I'm going to clean my stamps off really quickly now, because really it's just going to kind of stain the stamps a little bit, but still I don't like to leave ink on my stamps, so that's what I'm doing off to the side over there. It's just kind of cleaning that off. So now that that's done, the next thing I want to do is do a little bit of masking. So I've got some Inkadinkado masking paper there, and I'm going to just fussy cut this out, and I stamped my images because I want to color my background, but I want my stamped images to be protected. So I'm just going to cut those out and put those right on top of where I've already stamped so that I can do my background coloring without messing up my stamped images so that I can come back in, because I'm going to do those with Copic marker. So as you can see, I'm just laying my masks on top of there. So now I'm going to do my background, and I'm using a little bit of Spun Sugar Distress ink and the Clarity Stamp stencil brush. This is the second largest brush, and it just gives you a really, really nice soft color. I'm going to try to show you in a second, but it's going to be kind of hard to see. It's visible color, but it's still very, very light, and it lets you build up your color slowly. So once I put the white frame over it, you'll be able to see that it's pink, and then once I peel the masks off, you can see like the clear separation there. It's just a nice way to get a soft background. So now I'm going to color in my stamped images, and I will be using Copics to do this. So I'm going to do a little bit of blending to color my fairy in, but nothing really, really difficult, just regular blending from dark to light. And I use Copic Chows because I feel like you can get more colors without quite as big an investment, and they're the exact same marker. They're just slightly smaller, so you have to refill them a little bit more often. But to me, I feel like it's nice to get more colors, and it's not quite as expensive. So as you can see here, I'm using 4 different purples on her hair because I wasn't quite satisfied with just using the 3, so I wanted something just a little bit darker to come back in right here to do the highlights for her hair. And then the flower, I'm just going to keep super simple. I'm just going to do a little bit of shading on the petals, just to kind of give it a little bit of dimension right there. And now that that's done, my next part now is actually setting up the track for the slider card, which is probably like the most difficult part. So I'm going to start by taking just some scraps of white cardstock, and this is all Neenah 80-pound solar white, except for my card base, that's 110-pound solar white. So I'm just going to cut some thin strips to go around the bottom and on each side of this card. And these are cut at right about 1/8 of an inch. And the ones on the bottom are maybe 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch. And so I'm layering these up, one at the bottom, and I'm just going to use my stamp runner for that one at the bottom. And then for the really thin strips on the sides, I'm using some Ranger multi-matte medium, and I'm just going to do 2 layers on the sides of those thin strips, and then I'm going to trim all the edges so that they fit right around the card. So in the center, I've got a piece that's about 1/4 of an inch smaller than the insides of the tracks, and that's so that it can move freely. So I'm putting really small pieces of foam tape right there to stop my card from coming out. So the piece that I put on the bottom will work as a stopper for that slider going up and down. So now you want to take your piece of acetate and just put some double-sided adhesive. I'm using some double-sided adhesive that's 1/8 of an inch wide. And you're going to line that up, your plastic stamped or your acetate stamped image. You're going to line it up directly with your colored in image. And you want to put your slider in at this point because otherwise it's not going to work. So you need that to go between the colored image and the acetate for this to work. So I'm just trimming down my acetate right there so that my 2 little pieces of foam tape will be able to stick to the piece that's going to go on top, which is the heart frame. So if you see there, I'm checking just to make sure that it works. And now I'm going to put another layer of 1/8 of an inch double-sided tape, and I'm going to now assemble the entire card. But first I wanted to stamp my sentiment on the frame that's going to go on the outside. So I'm using another stamp from that set that says "Have a Very Nice Day," and I'm just going to use some Versamark ink and stamp that right at the bottom. And I'm just going to get some silver embossing powder for this and just put that in my little tray and then clean it off a little bit. And I could have used my powder tool, but since there was no other ink on that, I just decided to just go ahead and stamp directly on it. So now I'm going to get my heat tool out and go ahead and heat that up. And I want to be careful because I don't want it to warp. So I was moving kind of quick there. And now it's all lined up. I'm going to peel the release paper off my double-sided adhesive and my 2 tiny pieces of foam tape. And I'm going to line all that up. make sure everything sticks really well. Okay, check to make sure my slider works. I had a little bit of ink there, so I'm using my sand eraser. And the last thing I want to do is round the edges of my slider. And then I decided I was just going to add one small detail. And that's just, I'm going to write pull at the top of that. So I marked it with a pencil right there so that I would know exactly how much room I would have. And so I wanted to check a couple of different kinds of pens. And I'm using I ended up using one of the Moonlight Jelly Roll pens. And I was checking there just to make sure how it would look before I actually put it on my card because I didn't want to mess it up. So rather than waiting for that to dry, I just got my heat tool and heated it up so that I could go ahead and erase my pencil line out of there with making sure that it didn't smudge. So now it's all done. There you go. And the slider's working. So the reason why I used a separate card is because I didn't want the coloring to show through on the back of the card at all. So now that I have it done like that, I'm going to stamp my own stamp on the back. And there you go. Your finished slider card. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching, and you could try this with a bunch of different shapes. I'll see you guys in the next time. Bye!